Hey everybody, it's Sean from the Ham and Cheese Show and welcome back to a new build. Today we're going to get started on a dining room bench to accompany a farmhouse table that I built approximately the same time last year, about this time. This bench is going to be a little different than what you would expect. There are tons of videos from far better woodworkers and DIYers on YouTube, especially that have done some really phenomenal kind of dining room benches for their tables. And so if you want to learn some of the best techniques out there and to do that, I'll be happy to shoot you links to them, but there are some really phenomenal ones out there. However, I plan on incorporating some of those elements into my bench, but I wanted to take a little bit of a different twist to that. The farmhouse table, like I said, that I have is pretty long, and I didn't want the bench to basically take up the full space of that. I wanted to be able to tuck it in underneath. So this bench, I'm actually going to incorporate some extensions on it that will kind of be on a hinged on the end. I don't know how successful this is going to be. I actually sent out a few kind of Reddit posts to kind of poll the woodworking community there to get an idea of should I or shouldn't I, what kind of material should I use. We'll see how it goes. I don't know how it's going to play out at the end, but of course the video only time will tell. So without further ado, let's get started. So this isn't any normal design, but like at the beginning of any build, I usually try to go over my kind of list of materials, the number of cuts I have to make, measurements, double checking, triple checking sometimes. It wasn't necessarily at the beginning of the design, but there was a point when I realized that I needed to change the design, as I mentioned in the intro. A little bit overbuilt in some instances. Some of it was not necessarily measurements, but some design changes that needed to be made to accommodate some other elements that I wanted to keep within it. But as I mentioned, pretty straightforward in terms of a bench. There's far better ones on YouTube, but this is just kind of my spin on that. So after I went through all my list of goods and materials, I decided, well, first thing you gotta do is kind of cut stuff down and get stuff prepped. And I'm just, these boards here are actually for the top of the bench. I wanted to get that glued up and get that situated first and foremost. So here I'm just ripping these boards down, ripping off the kind of rounded over edges that come out of the lumber mills, and just kind of ripping off the sides. These are pretty long boards, 2x12s I think they were, or maybe it's 2x10s, I can't recall exactly. So pretty long, a little unwieldy in some cases. Some of them were not necessarily warped, but did have a little bit of a bend or a little bit of a bow in it. So just trying to keep that under control. Here, just real quick, you can see, I think they were 2x10s. Anyway, you can see here, one was a little bit more bowed than the other. So to kind of fix that in the clamping process, I decided to just use my biscuit cutter here, just cutting some slots for the biscuits just prior to the glue up. I've used this technique on a couple other projects. A lot of other woodworkers have too, and it had some pretty phenomenal results in terms of not necessarily adding any strength. I think the strength really comes from the glue and how tight you can make that joint to that between the two pieces of wood. But really, it kind of helps hold the two pieces in place in alignment. I still use a lot of clamps on these, but it still helps. Here's just a real quick glue up, trying to get this all prepped and ready. You'll notice the end there was kind of beat up. This was far longer than the actual bench itself, so I didn't want to cut it to length just yet, because there's some areas that I wasn't sure as to where placement wise I was going to make all my cuts, but those ended up in the scrap bin. And this was kind of unwieldy. I think my camera battery went on a couple times here, so you didn't get to see the final squish of glue, but you can see some of them I had to put some other cross pieces in there just to keep the alignment, keep them kind of lined up well. I noticed though in my glue up, so this is kind of after the glue up, that the one end had a little bit of a, it wasn't pulled apart, it was still tight, but I wanted to try my hand at putting a bow tie kind of to help strengthen the joint there. So this is just kind of just cutting that out. This is on poplar, even though the rest of the material was all pine. I figured, you know, try something different, so I had a little piece of poplar sitting around, and I didn't stain it any differently in the end, but again, just wanted to try something different, and then just trying to clean up the lines as I had kind of cut them pretty close to it, but you know, this is it's never perfect. Here I'm just actually marking the wood for the actual bow tie itself. This was my first bow tie, as I just mentioned, that I've ever done. Not my first time actually doing any chisel work, but this was definitely an interesting experience. I plan on doing a couple other things in the future. In this build, I got a lot of time doing chiseling and really trying to get better at it. Definitely not something that I am as familiar with in terms of, as you can see, I kind of really beat up this wood. I did my best to keep it within inside of the markings, and this one really took a little bit of time. You'll see a little bit later in the video some other kind of chiseling, but the further I got into this, the easier it got. I think the first couple I left it a little bit proud, just so that then I could kind of come back with my hand planer here and just kind of get it flush with the wood. Didn't want to sand everything because, man, there's a lot of sanding later on, and I don't think my camera likes the sanding process all that much. So I usually don't sand on camera. Ventilation is something I got to work on in my shop. Anyway, now it was kind of time to start to cut the ends a little bit more, not straight, but get them kind of closer to the final product, final end size. Just kind of getting the square end there. I left a lot of the stuff in clamps because I could move the clamps around, and it's a pretty big top, but I was able to then kind of keep the pieces from falling off, and they're kind of perfectly situated. So I was able to cut both ends, the middle piece, as well as you'll see here the two ends that go up and down. So let's pause here for a second. The reason I'm pausing is because, as I mentioned, this design did not go accordingly, and I actually had to go back and change some stuff.
Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
Gosh, I love Back to the Future. So the point is that I actually had to go and change the design. Initially, I had kind of a finger locking, interlocking wooden hinge. I filmed it all, but due to a lot of different things, issues in tools and issues in other materials, I just wasn't able to pull it together. Okay, so this is like the fourth time that I've filmed this particular segment, partly because it doesn't matter how well I plan or design some of these pieces of furniture or woodworking projects, inevitably there's always something that goes awry, I think, in some of the designs, especially on things that are kind of unique or different than anything else that I've seen, which is not necessarily what I always try to do, but at least for this one, I was going for not your stereotypical bench. And in the process of the design, I realized in the execution that it's a little bit more difficult to do. In the original design, I don't know if you may see in some of the images, had like finger locking or interlocking hinge, kind of like the pins on a door. Well, after trying to execute on it multiple times and actually trying to fix and recorrect some of the problems that I came across in terms of drilling, the making of the fingers wasn't a problem, but actually getting the hole drilled all the way through and some of the other elements, I found that it was probably going to be more impossible based on the limited tools that I have available to me at this time during this project. I didn't necessarily want to prolong the project because there's other things I needed to get to. So I ended up having to take off the fingers, and I'm going to actually have to cut a little bit more off of the ends or the extensions themselves just to get it a little more squared up. But we'll end up using maybe a piano hinge. I'll still use the same pull-out system, the cantilever system underneath that will then extend out and support this as the extension folds up. So I think that should all be pretty straightforward. It doesn't require any unnecessary kind of woodworking or any unnecessary hinges or anything that I've yet to see today. So we'll see how the rest of the build goes. So again, we'll keep going. So now that we're back in the alternate reality, here I'm just kind of squaring up, marking the top of the bench itself for what will be the mortises that will receive the tenons of the legs. There's only 2 legs in this one. Again, as I mentioned before, as I was cutting out or chiseling out the wood for the bow tie, there's a fair amount of chiseling that I did for this. Partly I could have just drilled a lot of it out, but I wanted to kind of experiment to kind of really get some practice in that. And fast forwarding that, you can see here's the first one completed, and there's of course 4 more. So here's after I completed 1, 2, and you can see 3 and 4 marked out and cut up. This is the top itself. I'm sorry, this is the part of the legs. So I'm cutting the legs pieces to length, and then as I did the other ones, just kind of cutting off the edges there, getting them a little squared up. I didn't do a whole lot in terms of additional planing. I tried to get the pieces that were most square. Now I'm just kind of marking out the areas for what will then be the tenons. Really just kind of, it's going to be a lot of hogging out. I made a jig for this part to kind of facilitate this because they're a little unwieldy in terms of height. And this is just, I still have the jig. It's a great jig. It can use some fine tuning. Wasn't perfect, but it worked for the job. Like most woodworkers, it's just kind of problem solving on some of these kind of occasions. And so I'm just kind of, again, just hogging out, cutting a lot of this up, and then I'll go back and then remove it after the fact on the bench. But did this for both of the legs just to kind of expedite this. Planing it up a little bit just to kind of get the fit really tight, or as tight as possible. And then here I'm marking out what will be there's actually 3 cutouts here. There'll be 2 for the upper part that will be part of the support system for the extensions, and then a piece in the middle that will then receive will be like a stretcher between yeah, I apologize how fast this is, but there's so much footage for this. Anyway, this will receive the stretcher between the 2 legs itself to kind of stabilize that piece itself. And then here I'm just, as I've done before, I'm again flying through this process here. I'm just marking out, using just a utility knife to mark out, or to mark the wood itself, so that I can come back and then chisel it out. A lot of chiseling, a lot of wood chips. My shop was pretty much covered by the end of this project, despite my best efforts to keep it clean. On these though, I ended up actually putting another board underneath so that I didn't have a lot of blowout. I learned from the top part. Anyway, so here, I put something underneath so that you could I wouldn't blow it out. I'm cutting the stretcher at this point. I cut it to length, and then I'm just, again, as I've done before, apologize for the poor video focus. Just cutting the sides off of the length of the stretcher, just trying to get it as squared up as possible. I actually ran it through, yeah, here it is. So I'm running it through my kind of tabletop quarter cable, and trying to get it as flat as possible. I wish I could have done it to the top itself, but I was able to kind of come back with a plan on that. Here I'm just kind of marking what will be the tenons, since I've already cut the mortises on the legs itself. I'm just marking that up for what will just be a couple cuts on the sides, and then that centerpiece. I think I did use the drill for that. And here I am with just this scroll saw. But the middle part, I think I did drill it because I don't think I was going to be able to do it. Cleaning some of the lines up, area up by both chisel and then with the hand plane coming back to get it. I had it tapered just a little bit towards the actual tip, the end of it, just so it went in a little easier, because really I only needed it to be really a tighter fit back where it hits the shoulders of the stretcher. That's where it kind of tapers out a little bit, but actually really tight fit at first after sanding and stuff. It was a little looser, but it worked out in the end. This is one of the first kind of dry fits that I went through just to make sure that everything was nice and snug, and some of it was a little snugger than others. I wish that I had kind of, again, learning process as I've been going through this. I wish I'd kind of left on a little bit more wood, knowing that I was going to be sanding a lot of this stuff later on. But anyway, so dry fit went pretty well. Made at least 3 or 4 of these. And here's the next batch of, I apologize, don't even know the woodworking term for that, but the nails of sorts that kind of hold the pins. That's it, the pins. Now I'm kind of working on what are the extensions that will kind of support the cantilever, the arms that'll hold the top part, and I'm just cutting those to length, and I'll cut those to kind of width here in a second. So I'm kind of ripping off the edges, getting them a little more square. I've actually run it through the planer at this point. That's why they're a little thinner than the normal. Just marking them for what we'll have to kind of take again through the table saw. And for the table saw, actually marked, there's a slight gray line there. You'll be able to see where I kind of needed to stop all the wood. And then that allowed me to get a more machined cut rather than using the scroll saw for all those. And then again, I'm cutting the other shorter shoulder cut on all of those pieces. Then there's just a little bit of a nub. I'm just finishing that up with that saw since it's just a small piece. So I did that on all 4 of those. And then I clamped all 4 of them together just so that I could do the through holes for the dowel rods later on, just so I could do it all at the exact same time. I also clamped the block to the bottom so there wasn't any tear out at the bottom, because I was kind of pushing through this a little fast. But did that on both ends, the front and the back. And then Yeah, there you can see the extensions there. So you may notice, okay, there's a big jump. So each of the legs received just kind of a base that is somewhat similar to what I had done on my dining room table. So I did that off camera just because I forgot to record it, really. There's no excuse there. But it was just glue, and then glue up of the box, hammered it on, glued it back on, and then kind of chamfered the ends or the top part actually before I glued it on. This is the gluing process or gluing stage, so a lot of glue up. I wanted this thing to, it would never come apart. I wasn't planning on ever pulling out the pins on the stretcher here. So everything received a lot of glue, even on the pin itself as I put it in there on both ends. So this is just the first part, getting that glued up. There was a lot of glue area, not a lot of time for it to set up. I think I was using Titebond 2 or 3, I can't remember. And then this is the glue up for the both legs into the top of the bench itself. This is the underside of it. I have seen a lot of woodworkers use these little kind of silicone brushes. Actually, my wife had a couple extra ones, so I borrowed one, and I meant to cut it down. But as a quick thing, people spend a fair amount of money on these. In a lot of places, you can get these at the Dollar General, dollar store, literally for like $1. I've never really found a lot of use to spending a lot of extra money on things that you could repurpose from other items or elements. Anyway, so final glue up here, just kind of getting that all squared in, put in there. And the final area, or part of this segment, is just the clamp. There was a little bit of a kink, a little bit of a bow in it, and I'll go back and I fix that a little later. Didn't capture that because it was just a simple cutting on the base of the legs itself. Did a couple clamps here. I didn't add too many because the weight of this thing itself really helped. I just needed to get a tighter fit, especially on one end. But let that dry overnight, and then moved on to staining here. So you can see I did a walnut stain. Again, this was kind of to follow what I had done on this particular bench was the pull-outs, the support structures itself. I just wanted to make sure that these are the only things that I wanted to have stained. And then before we moved on to do the base, I wanted to do poly on everything because the base was actually going with my random orbital sander, about 220. So they received a fair amount of sanding, and then found that the foam brushes worked best on that. So you can see here as we jump ahead in time, the base received the paint, and I'll talk about that again. I'm just putting on a lot of paste wax on the sliders, or the support sliders, so that go in and out of this. And there was a lot of fine tuning. A lot of the chalk paint rubbed off a couple of times, just trying to get it to work as best as possible. And the nice part of this is that this is kind of close to the end. I'm just fastening on or putting on the hinges, and actually mortised in the hinges on the extension part. You can see here that it sits flush because of the mortise, just so that it didn't, when it was all the way up, that it had a little bit of a tighter fit. I didn't do that on the bench top, I just wanted to do that on here in just a second. so that I could get it kind of flush and at the proper angle that I needed to, so that I could fasten it. And then again, just put a And so it's sagging a little bit here, and so I went back and actually tweaked something, and I'll talk about it here in a second. Okay, so this project is carried on long enough. It's about 95% done right now. There's some minor detail things I need to iron out, finish up before I take it into the house. Mostly dealing with the support runners. I added some blocks to help with the cantilevering. I need to put some more paste wax on it so that it's a little easier pulling out to kind of support the extensions of the wings. Other than that, it's about done. This has been a long build. A lot of changes over the course of the build. I don't think that my design was 100% perfect. I wouldn't say it was anyway, but I didn't go with the middle support as well. I thought that it was a short enough span that it didn't require one. Also took out a few other areas that I thought was just kind of overkill for the length of it. One thing that you didn't see in some of the footage is the painting of the base, the legs, and the stretcher in the middle, mostly because it's just paint, primer, and we added some chalk paint. This is a similar motif, for lack of a better word. Stained pine boards, walnut stain on the top with the chalk paint on the base, similar to a farmhouse table that I built last year about the same time. For our dining room. So this will actually accompany it. We'll have benches on one side, or bench on one side, and normal chairs on the other side. So it's going to get a lot of good use for my 3 boys. So we'll see how it fares over time. I had a couple extra coats of poly, so we'll see how that wears out. We have some other projects coming up in the month of December, possibly. So hopefully. Cheese and myself can get those posted so that you guys can take a look at those if you want. Like or subscribe to the videos. Visit us on Patreon if you feel so inclined. Otherwise, have a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and maybe we'll see you in the new year.